Who is Dr. Destroyo?
Who is Dr. Destroyo?
Who is Dr. Destroyo?
Who is Dr. Destroyo?
Who is Dr.
Who is Dr. Destroyo? Who is Dr. Destroyo?
Who is Dr. Destroyo?
Who is Dr. Destroyo?
I am Dr. Destroyo. From the Death by Media Man podcast show, it's Dr. Destroyo. The story of the world's first true supervillain. We're telling Dr. Destroyo in sequence every 2 weeks. So if you haven't listened to the first episodes, go back and start there. Then, this will all make a lot more sense. Chapter 5. I came home one day to find a supervillain on the couch. Well, it wasn't a supervillain exactly. It was the shadow of a supervillain, a foreshadow. It was the echo of a voice that had yet to speak. It wasn't the toy, but it was the box which the toy came in, and that was almost just as exciting. "What the hell are you wearing?" I had to ask. "Check me out," said Tom. "I'm an evil mastermind." And maybe, for just a moment there, he was. He was the start of it anyway. The genesis. There have been a few different masks attributed to Dr. Destroyo, specifically the various versions which were pulled from the corpses which had been passed off as dead doctors. The masks are known to have evolved a bit over time, but the one on Tom was the original. It was the prototype from which all others took their inspiration. The mask was really just a plain, dark green hood. It clung to the sides of Tom's skull, and the front hung down to about 2 inches below his chin. There were no visible holes for him to see through, though the clarity of Tom's voice implied a porous quality to the cloth. Tom pulled it off his head to reveal it's like a thin ski mask with the hood sewn over top. The ski mask keeps it close to your face while still giving the hood the mobility it requires to look all cool and shifty. "Cool and shifty is for sure how it looks," I agreed, taking the cloth off his hands. "Where'd you find it?" "In an alley on the way home." "And you had this on your face?" I asked, eyeing the disguise with all new suspicions. "I put it through the wash first, but you gotta admit it's not bad, right?" I slipped the mask on, unceremoniously, and it fit nice and snug. I could see and breathe through it pretty easily. After I'd had it on for a couple of moments, I could feel my breath moistening the mouth of the mask. "I was thinking," Tom said, "that the hook would be that you just wear it with like a plain suit, sort of cheap and anonymous looking." "That's exactly how I describe myself," I exclaimed happily from under the hood. That might have been what gave me the idea, Tom reflected, before he retreated off into his room to change into some cheap, anonymous-looking clothes. A few minutes later, Tom came back out in a sort of grayish-brown suit that sat a little loose on my roommate's narrow frame. I'd seen him in the outfit a few times before, but always just for job interviews. Previously, it had been a pretty dorky-looking ensemble, but then when he put the mask back on, it was something else again. Something... A bunch of words came to mind. Sinister, foreboding, mocking, arrogant. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was something there. Something kind of powerful. Or again, the potential for something. It was like looking up into a sky full of clouds that could be about to turn into a storm, or maybe just blow over and be a day like any other. But you'd love a big storm, wouldn't you? Something that would really rattle the windows. The sort of storm that could wake you from a deep slumber and keep you up all night. Well, I said, stating the obvious in a loud and decisive voice, now he just needs a name. Tom peeled off the mask and hit the couch, loading up the bong as he fell towards the cushion. Commander Kills-A-Lot, the maniacal Mr. Mask, the certain death, Doctor Hates Your Mom. Do you really want to hear the rest of these? Okay. The Black Soul Phantom Heart, Mr. Evil McNasty, Professor Puritanical, the Terrible Twist, the Squelching Storm, he, the Man from Next Week, the Faceless Clown, the Mad Meme, the Curmudgeon, the Cretin, Mr. Fly Up Your Nose, Hate, the Horrible Bunny, TV's Frank, Mr. Oversight, Master Oversight, the Twat of Many Titles, the Amoral Ass, the Ant-Agonistical Axiom, the Living Square, the Forgotten 5000, the Eyeless Face, the Faceless Eye, the Evil Ear, the Guy. Oh, come on, the Guy? You're not even trying now. The Linguini with Mushrooms, Professor Platitude, the Stabbing Knife, the Laughter, the Crier, the Butcher, the Baker, the Cunt Stick Maker, Dr. Duck, Ghostbot 6000, the Jerkstar Phantom, the Ashtray, Filthmonger, the Molestinator, the Junk, the Groper, Captain Colossal Waste of Time, the Fifth Fingertip, the Tomorrow Threat, Mr. Shitmouth. We hashed it out for hours and then got bored and watched TV for the rest of the night, while still tossing about a series of names which were all too terrible to even remember. That continued on until whenever we passed out, nodding off on the couch fully dressed, like senior citizens sometimes do. But when I woke up the next morning, there was a piece of a pizza box on the coffee table, and on that scrap of the cardboard box, somebody had scrawled a name. It had been written with a big black marker in thickly meaningful capital letters. It was a name, and that name was Dr. Destroyo. So there we had it. Neither of us could remember which one of us came up with it, but we could vaguely remember that we'd laughed about it for a long time, shortly before one of us wrote it down and we both faded out. Okay then, Tom said, sliding the mask back on. Dr. Destroyo it is. And so it was. Chapter 6. This is so fucking stupid, Tom said. And he clearly meant it, but then he giggled a little. I'd never heard Tom giggle before, and it didn't sound right. Hearing my cynical friend giggle was a bit like seeing a pig dressed up in a fancy tuxedo. It seemed inappropriate, even unnatural. But then everything about Dr. Destroyo felt a little unnatural. Tom was dressed in his gray-brown suit, and I was wearing what I deemed to be quote-unquote normal clothing. Blue jeans and a black long-sleeve t-shirt. I was trying to look like nobody, like any idiot on the street, which wasn't that far off from the truth. You don't want to look like you're supposed to be anybody, Tom had suggested. Or rather, you want to look like you could be anybody. And when we're done, we should probably throw the clothes away just to be safe. Except the mask, I'd mentioned. I haven't decided yet about the mask, Tom said hesitantly, tapping the toe of one shoe on the street side as we waited for a light to change. We were down on the east side of the city. It was a little after 2 a.m., and things were looking shifty, though not fully into crime on the streets territory. Out on the main drag, there were lots of crackheads and junkies milling about, and the roadways were full of fast-moving taxicabs and slow-moving cop cars, with a handful of late-night buses rumbling noisily past vacant bus stops. A couple of blocks off the main strip, though, and things got a lot quieter quite quickly. A few loners drifted around, mostly with hoods up and heads down. There were a few old men pushing a few old shopping carts. Those guys used to be called winos or hobos or bums. Now they're panhandlers or addicts or bums. They've always been bums. There were prostitutes too, or sex workers or whores or whatever you want to use for the plethora of terms for the same profession. There were small clusters of them feathering past intersections, eyeing every passing vehicle, cabs and cops included, waving in a friendly fashion at everybody, except the buses. They wore miniskirts, tube tops, vests, high heels, and all with a lot of flesh on display. It looked a little sleazy from a distance off, but up close it was a nightmare of aged faces with creases gouged into them by abuse, neglect, and other forms of street life. Makeup caked like plaster filler over top of drywall holes. Unkempt wigs struggling off of scalps and down backs. At first, Tom and I were ready to make some glib remarks, but that died off pretty quick. There was nothing funny about any of it. If anything, it all served to remind us why we were there in the first place. This was the part of town somebody wanted to turn into a panel from a comic book. These were the streets that were going to see superheroic action based around colorful characters with silly suits. These sad little lives were about to be overshadowed by some make-believe meta-men. Local lives which had been otherwise abandoned by a political system which would rather spend tax dollars on a fancy new sports stadium. It's such bullshit, I complained. You ever notice that every decision about this neighborhood is made by men and women who live way across town? They don't even commute through this area, but then once a year they come down here and freak out about the state of social decay. And then they tell the cops to start hassling more street people, as though that's going to actually solve anything. They're not going to spend money on this part of town, Tom reminded me. There's no gain to it. It's a lost cause. The best you could hope for from an urban renewal standpoint would be for maybe some big business group to buy it all up, bulldoze it down, and then grow some heavily guarded apartment complexes over the ruins. And if that happens, the people who run this city will throw a fucking party, while the homeless all go find a bridge to scurry under. Maybe Mr. Scorpio has some ideas about what we could do to help the impoverished in our community, I suggested dryly. I would say that he certainly already has injected something of a voice into the conversation on this topic, Tom said with a grim smile, one hand gripping the mask. He's given us all an anonymous force of potential violence to strive to emulate. I don't know what we were doing there, out on the streets, out in the real world. I was so much more comfortable being back on the couch making clever comments about all the lives I could watch through the cable connection that ran through the wall. But there we were. It was just going to be a simple midnight stroll, a chance for a couple of stoners to clear their heads and maybe grab some pizza. But there we were, deep to the east, wandering the streets like a couple of, I don't know, thugs, idiots, dorks. It was late and dark, and we were in a bad part of town, looking for a masked man to hassle. Dr. Destroyo is written and produced by Hank Pattison for the Death by Media Man podcast channel. You can subscribe to the Death by Media Man podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. If you enjoyed this, please leave us a like or a comment and tell a friend. And if you'd like to support the Death by Media Man channel with your money, there's a link to our Patreon in the description of this program. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in 2 weeks for the next installment of Dr. Destroyo.